We get a lot of questions about partnering with IRAs. Well, I'd like to buy a house in an IRA. I've got a house that I want to purchase and make this into an investment property. It's going to cost $150,000, but I don't have $150,000 in my retirement account. Does that mean you could partner with it and you contribute? Maybe your spouse contributes, and maybe there's 3 partners: your IRA, her IRA, and then I personally put some money in. We're really forming a partnership between the 3. Now, if you're using IRA money, and I say this loosely, could it be a self-directed 401k? Could it be? Yeah. So I'm using qualified funds loosely. Could you partner with them on a real estate deal? The answer is yes. But if we do that, once that initial contribution is made, I can't contribute more, or I can't take out less, or move more money over time. I contributed 60-40, and now I want to change that and move more money to the no. Whatever the initial contribution is on a partnership has to remain the same for the life of that asset. If you sell it, then it gets split 60-40, whatever arrangements you made, and then we move on to another asset. So that's a question we've had a lot. What about flipping? How do I flip property if I'm using a IRA or self-directed 401, if I'm using retirement funds? And should I flip, and should I hold within the same entity? The answer is absolutely not. One has tremendous risk. And so if you're using retirement accounts, there's what's called self-dealing. And I personally don't like checkbook control for my IRA. It's very rare that I would recommend that you have a check and checkbook. You control all of the funds for your IRA. You can go down to Home Depot and buy whatever you want to buy, and nobody's looking over your shoulder. There's a reason why we pay custodians a couple $100 a year to look over your account, check every transaction you make sure that they're compliant. Because in a lawsuit, you could very well, or an IRS audit, you could very well lose all the protections because of self-dealing activities. Either I did something wrong. Every time I went to Home Depot, I bought a Coke, and it was right there at the check stand. I put it on. It came out of IRA funds. Oh, that's prohibited. Or I rented to my son, or I paid my daughter to mow the lawn, or things that are prohibited, I can't do. And so if you're not aware of all those laws, and I don't know many people that are, sometimes having a custodian and paying them a couple $100 is a kind of a good idea. The question comes up about using IRA funds. Should I have an IRA in every state if I'm holding property? Let's say I'm holding property in 3 states. If we did this and we used LLCs, we would generally want a separate LLC for my Kentucky properties, separate than my Indiana properties, separate than my Ohio properties. Why? So that I have standing in that state. I can enforce contracts. I can defend myself in court. I can evict tenants. I can walk into court and I have standing. If you don't have standing, you may very well be sitting there right on the front row defending yourself. You're in the courtroom at the time, and the plaintiff's attorney goes, "Judge, motion to dismiss because the defendant didn't show up today." And you have no standing. You're like a silent partner. The judge does not have to recognize that you even exist, even though you're sitting there. It's irrelevant. You do not have standing in that court at that time. Therefore, motion for dismissal, to dismiss or motion for summary judgment, whatever it is, would be granted because you didn't show up. You'd have no standing in the courts. However, IRAs do have standing in all courts. So the rules that apply to LLCs, let's have a separate LLC for your Indiana property, separate from the Ohio, separate than Kentucky, don't apply to IRAs. One IRA could own, in theory, it could own all three properties. Now be careful about putting, now I told you that plans are protected from outside lawsuits. However, could you do something inside of your IRA? Let's say I've got 10 rental properties in there. Could one of them create a lawsuit that blows up everything inside of that legal bubble? And the answer is yes. And so the same rules apply to LLCs. Sometimes we have multiple LLCs, don't we? And we base it on the equity that we have, the risk that we have. We base it on state laws and state filing fees. In this case, the same rules would apply to an IRA. Sometimes we have more than one IRA. I put these two rental properties with very little equity in one IRA. I put my commercial property in another IRA, and so that the risk and the liability of the two rental properties doesn't affect anything else. So those same rules would apply whether we're using LLCs or whether we're using IRAs.